One of the most turbulent times in English history saw the nation plunged into civil war upon the insistence of the tyrant King Charles I. Charles would ultimately lose his head in 1649 on a cold January morning in London, and he would be condemned by axe for his treason against the English people. This left England without a monarch, and what came next was the oversight of the country under the control of Oliver Cromwell. However, the eldest surviving son of King Charles I, Prince Charles, had only been 8 years old when the Civil War broke out, and he was with his father at the Battle of Edge Hill and Oxford. But his father then told him to seek safety in France. Later, his son would become the restored monarch of England, becoming King Charles II. And he was known as the Merry Monarch for his partying antics, and also the fact he had a huge number of illegitimate children. Charles II brought a lot of positivity back to England following Cromwell's short flirtation with rule, but he encountered himself a terrible death, and shockingly, in the years and centuries after, Charles II's coffin has been opened, and what was found was harrowing. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. The Scottish were appalled by the execution of King Charles I, and they would proclaim his son Charles as their king, and they invited him to come to Scotland. Cromwell would later march north and fight the Scots and capture part of Scotland, but on the 1st of January 1651, the Scots crowned Charles II at Scone, and then the English army came back to fight. The Scots fought in England too. Charles II then escaped, and he went back to France, but following the death of Cromwell, the whole idea of a Lord Protector collapsed, and Charles II spent many years in exile, until in 1660 he was invited back to London to restore his father's throne. There was a number of disastrous events during Charles II's reign, including the Great Plague of London in 1665, and then the following year, the Great Fire of London, which decimated much of the capital. England was also at war with the Dutch, and the Dutch did defeat them. He was, as mentioned, known as the Merry Monarch, and he had huge parties and banquets, and he also had many mistresses, and he would therefore have many illegitimate children, which caused chaos as his brother then had to become his successor. Charles II was a patron of the arts, and he founded the Royal Society. However, he died on the 6th of February 1685 at the age of 54 inside the Palace of Whitehall. He had been ill for some time, and on the 3rd of January the king had a serious seizure, and every 6 hours he was given further treatments, including creams and antidotal milk water, as well as further medications and poisons. The doctors continued to bleed the king, and they took another 3/4 of a pint of blood from him, and they continued the treatment which caused his skin to bleed. He then suffered the next day from a fever, which was intermittent, and he continued to be purged and made sick, and he was further given spirit of a human skull, as well as other strange compounds. But on the Friday, 6th of February 1685, the king died. He apologised to his doctors, and he said he had taken a very long time to die, and his brother, the Duke of York, came to his side and told him not to let his mistress, Nell Gwyn, starve following his death, and he claimed, "I have suffered very much, and more than any of you can imagine. My business will shortly be done." Following seeing the rising sun, he became breathless, and another pint of blood was removed from him. He then became unconscious and died before midday. The post-mortem discovered that the king's veins on the surface of his brain were filled, and the ventricles of his heart were filled with some kind of matter, and that his heart was large and firm. There was even blood found inside of his lungs, and his liver was engorged with blood, as were his kidneys and spleen. These indicated that the king was very sick, and that he may have had a cerebral infection. But there were rumours at the time that King Charles II was poisoned. He had for some time suffered with chronic gout, and had also in his final days become very dehydrated. There was little knowledge of his condition, though, at the time, proven by the different treatments he was administered, and today his life could have been prolonged, and he could have been given a good quality of life. Following this investigation, his body was then embalmed, and his wooden coffin enclosed in a lead coffin, which was covered with purple velvet, and was left to lay in state before his burial took place inside of Westminster Abbey on the 14th of February 1685. His coffin was placed in a vault in the south aisle of King Henry VII's Lady Chapel, and his entrails, including his heart and intestines, were removed after death and placed in a box which was placed next to the coffin. On the coffin plate was the inscription, "The remains of the most noble and serene Prince Charles II, King of England, Scotland, France and Ireland, defender of the faith, etc. He died on the 6th day of February, the year of our Lord 1684, and the 55th year of his age, and the 37th of his reign." His funeral procession was rather low-key, and a life-sized wax effigy stood by his grave for over a century, and it contained a remarkable likeness to the king, and may have been cast from his face whilst he was alive. Charles II was placed in the vault that later became the Stuart vault, and he would be joined by later Stuart monarchs. Inside of this vault were placed the coffins of Queen Mary II, King William III, Prince George and Queen Anne, and also interred in this vault were their visceral urns containing their removed body parts during the embalming process of each of these monarchs and members of the royal family. Now, the Stuart vault remained undisturbed for a number of years, over a century, following the death of the final Stuart Queen, Anne. However, in the year 1867, building work was occurring inside of the Lady Chapel, and near to the vault and the entrance to the vault was accidentally discovered whilst builders were trying to install heating pipes. With this, investigators ventured into the Stuart vault, and they looked at the state of the coffins inside of there. King Charles II's was found at one end of the vault, next to the niche where his internal organs had been placed in a box. His coffin was inspected, and it was found that it was in a very bad way. Despite no one venturing inside of the vault before, the coffin was heavily damaged, and the lead plates of the coffin had fallen inwards, and this had partially exposed the remains of Charles II. When investigators peered into the coffin, they discovered that Charles II's skull was on display and could be seen, and the effect of the damage to the coffin had led to the skin on his head decaying due to the environment of the vault. The weight of the lead had caused damage to the coffin and thus exposed Charles II's remains. The fact his skull was on show also shows that his head may have not been wrapped in the cerecloth, or that he had also decayed. It was believed that his remains may have been well preserved because of the wrapping, but the skull was on display. Over the following years, the burial vault was opened a number of times, and there were no repairs done to Charles II's coffin, which have been documented. King Charles II, when he was invited to take the throne of England, following the restoration of the monarchy, oversaw a number of important but devastating events in his country. He helped to fight the Great Fire of London and dealt with the aftermath of the plague, and he may have thought that as a king he was doomed due to the chaos that these brought. But as he settled into his life as the King of England, Charles lived a very lavish life, and he spent huge amounts of money on parties and many of his royal mistresses. But in the years following his death, Charles II's coffin sustained damage that caused his remains to rot and become badly decayed. Thank you for watching, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. And again, thank you so much for watching.